of non-ambient stuff, what do we do? Interesting question. With the like validation cell stuff that we're talking about adding, which would basically block experimental fields, you could actually do something similar for ambient and say that, you know, if you enable the ambient only policy and it blocks fields that aren't supported in ambient, I don't know if that's right, but it's an option, right?
I mean, will we have a channel that is specific to ambient that only has the target ref and not workload selectors? And I mean, we have the two channels for Istio Classic, which is stable with everything, and
so I don't think it's a good practice to have different, like all these different micro API variances where you have to like build your own API basically, and you like go through a checkbox. I want ambient, I want stable, I want Costin's favorite fields and John's favorite fields, and like you like build your own CRD. Like the whole point of CRDs and is that they're kind of universal things. I feel like if we want to have all these different policies, it's almost like something on top of it, right? Like you can have policy that denies fields that are not supported in ambient, for example, or the opposite. I'm not using ambient. I want to deny fields that are only supported in ambient. Although,
but John, you're contradicting yourself. I mean, you're saying you don't want to have 10, multi, Costin's version and John version and whatever. But with the channel proposal, you have 2 or 3. With your proposal, we have an infinite number because depending on how you put the cell expressions, you have, infinite variation or permutation of instead of. I mean, 3 is better than n factorial.
No, I think there should be 1 actually, and no channels. And there's already existing practice of having validation on top of APIs, like things like Gatekeeper, right? Where you apply as an organization your own rules for what's allowed and not allowed. I think we could provide somewhat core templates for those and have things like the stable validation policy that ensures you only use stable things. The ambient validation policy that ensures you only use ambient things or don't use ambient things or whatever. And then you can also say the Acme Corp policy that says only use the fields that they like for their company and they deploy in their cluster.
So you're saying one CRT, but different, but use low power, something to validate.
I think so, yeah. Or if we're going to make, if we want 2 different CRDs, like have 2 different CRDs, I'm pretty skeptical about this whole like all sorts of different variations of the same CRD resource. Then like an API is like there's not even an API anymore. It's like a per customer thing if we get too extreme, right?
I don't disagree with you. I'm just trying to figure out how it impacts ambient and people who want to use just the gateway APIs. That's really my concern. And because with gateway API, we're talking about the official upstream APIs that we don't control, and it's not up to us. And there are vendor extensions plus whatever garbage that is left over from Istio.
I think if you don't want to use the Istio APIs, you don't have to install them, right?
No, but you are forced because a subset of the fields in a particular combination is a policy that is supported and needed for ambient.
Okay, so you want the extensions, though. I see.
I mean, vendor extensions are one thing, and we don't have any way to specify, hey, I want to use gateway API with ambient and all that, plus everything is related with zTunnel. I mean, the policies in the configuration that is supported by zTunnel, and policies attached to routes. Do you express it through a CRD? Do you express it through OPA or something? It's very difficult for user because CRDs go into auto-completion. That's the only reason I like the CRDs. OPA doesn't go into auto-completion.
Yeah. Yeah, that is true. Yeah, I mean, like for the different CRDs, like I feel you can get away with it with like at most 2, maybe 3. But what we're talking about is like getting into pretty fine-grained things. Like you're saying, oh, maybe I want just gateway API plus extensions that apply to zTunnel. Like that's a very bespoke thing, right? That is easily done by policies on top of it, and it can even be something that's shipped in a specific vendor's implementation that has those opinions.
Well, I think we're talking 3 really. I mean, it's not. I mean, one is you are using a gateway API surface with, you don't have sidecars basically. It's ambient only.
I think in this call, we'd probably get 20 different opinions on what it means to just use gateway API surface, though.
I mean, it's HTTP route and the stuff outside of our control is easy because we cannot influence it too much.
Right, but that's not what you're saying, right? You're saying and extensions.
I mean, yeah, we need vendor extension. Any vendor has vendor extensions, and how they are supported. That's also specified by. I mean, they specify HTTP route attachment. You know, there is a policy there that is outside of our control. It's not through not having the CRD or validation. Is by having the policy set in status. Hit. Sorry.
Yeah, I guess my concern is that I feel like the terms ambient only. Again, we've had this conversation several times before. The term ambient, I think, is being used in multiple different ways here. Ambient, the architecture versus ambient, the API surface are two different things. And you know, we were talking about this a little bit when it comes to like how we're going to organize the docs and stuff. But ideally, like most of the API surface of Istio also works with ambient. The main difference I can think of is target ref and workload selector, where there's a divergence, and then also some of the resources like HTTP route versus virtual service destination rule, things like that. But like if you want to use a I don't know, backend TLS policy with Istio Ingress Gateway, sure you can do that. I don't know. I'm worried about that we're conflating ambient API surface with ambient the architecture, and we're not getting that much out of it.
I think we had long 3 or 4 meetings of discussions about mixing virtual service and workload selectors and the Istio style API with gateway API. And I think the conclusion after many meetings was that we should not. I mean, if you're using gateway API HTTP route, you should use, you know, the gateway model. If you use Istio style with workload selector, you could use Istio style. You should not mix them in the same namespace at least, or probably cluster. If you want to reopen this, we can reopen it. I mean, again, I think we went over all arguments, but everything can be discussed again. My point is, it is a separate API surface because it has different behavior, different things you can combine, and different kind of, and from a user perspective, it's very difficult to know that when you have auto completion and all that, you know, if you use workload selector, it will not work if you happen to use ambient mode.
I think that the main point of that's distinguishing the two between channels versus validation is the persona. So I think channels is something that the Istio community manages, maintains, and has opinions about what is, and it has implications of stability. But to John's point, you know, many different organizations have different levels or different subsets of fields that they want to allow versus disallow. And so I don't feel like I feel like those are two different problems that need two different tools. So I'd be more in favor of policy-based admission for that for the user-based things, including ambient.
I don't know if it's versus. I mean, I think it's a combination of two. Definitely, you know, validation, OPA is already available. Everyone can use it already. I mean, putting cell is obviously a good idea. The question is really if we keep going with a gateway, with a different CRDs approach, if we have 2 or 3, that's my make. I mean, if we want to have one specifically for ambient, so we have P1 stable, we have ambient, and we have experimental, or we just have one, as John saying, plus validation, and then we give up auto completion and all the stuff that is going around CRDs.
I think I'm not necessarily opposed to an ambient subset of CRDs or ambient channel in general, but now is not the time for it, in my opinion. Like, we have so little information about how users are going to actually want to consume ambient that it's not helpful to even, debate having an ambient only channel right now.
I don't disagree necessarily. The reason I'm raising this is because I also don't fully understand what combinations will work and will not work. And having a CRD that is strictly or some way to indicate which fields are supported in ambient, which fields are not supported in ambient, would be a forcing factor to kind of get some clarity about what is supported and where. For example, workload selectors, we have some comments, but it's not, it's relatively complex. Like telemetry that just got promoted to V1. I mean, we don't necessarily have clear indication about what works with Z-tunnel, what works with waypoints, and what is specific to sidecar.
Can we start with documentation and then iterate as we need to?
That's a good point. I mean, again, something we need to have some plan. I mean, I don't know what is the best approach, but validation is also fine to have a validator that it's specifically selecting all the fields that are. So it looks like we are more or less on the same page. We're agreeing, but we just need to figure out what is the next step and how it influences the decision about channels versus validations.
I think the channel discussion, planning to discuss more about that tomorrow. But with respect to the ambient, to ambient specifically, I think that probably starting with documentation now and then considering validation, and then if drastic enough, if we feel like neither one of those meet the needs that we're seeing from the users, consider embedding them into separate CRDs. I think that's a solid progression. Cool.
If we have no other topics, can I ask what is the status with the AJ proxy? I mean, and the sandwiches, if anyone knows. I saw some PRs, but I don't know what's kind of.
Z-tunnel now supports sending it, and we have kind of a interim annotation way to trigger the Z-tunnel to send it. But we don't actually have any implementation in our Envoy. Like,
okay, so Envoy still doesn't have it. Okay. And you have a doc or somewhere where we kind of a user guide or something how to set up the annotation and how to put things together?
No, not exactly. I mean, I think before we do that, we should I have one thing that's like a static Envoy config that's a sample. And so I guess it's like, if we want to do this, the guide would be more along the lines of like, how do you use a non-Istio proxy as a waypoint is the only reason that you would actually need to touch this.
Yeah, that's what I'm interested in, of course.
Yeah.
Can you put this in a doc and including the annotation and kind of, so again, we need to have some docs and some clear specifications.
Okay, fair.
And by the way, also the Envoy gateway, there's some discussion about them supporting this as well, so they can be swapped in. Okay, nothing else from me. Anyone else has topics?
No, I don't have anything specific, but just a heads up, we are very rapidly approaching the code freeze for 1.22. I think things are looking pretty close to everything landing, but we should be expedient in getting things out and reviewing and whatnot, so we can hit that deadline and hopefully not have to back forward too much stuff to get things in a good state for 1.22.
Louis had mentioned the possibility about maybe launching L7 as part of 1.22, I think. Is there more thought on that?
I think we could do it. To be honest, will we have it fully beta quality by Friday when, let me see when the exact branch cut freeze is. Let's see, April 15th. So, oh, that's actually next Monday. So will we have it beta quality by Monday? Probably not. Will it be in a state that we can get the core stuff by Monday and then fix a few bugs in the coming 4 weeks that we have for code freeze and have it beta quality by the time we ship it? I think yes.
John, you mean with Sandwich? I mean, what discussed earlier with Stephen?
No, it's
because that freeze,
I mean, the current way that at least I've been operating on is that Istio's default, if you just install Istio Ambient and get a waypoint, it's not going to use the sandwich. We could add that as a thing in the future, but that's at least not what we're initially doing.
So how would how would it connect?
The waypoint itself knows how to terminate and send HBone.
Okay, so yeah, okay, so we're just using HBone in the envoy. Got it.
Yep. Now we could also add a mode for sandwich, or we could swap it out for sandwich if later it is better in every way. But yeah, for now, what we're doing.
Sense.
Yeah, and like when we say L7 too, like we can put caveats there. Like I think we'll probably not say interop with sidecars, for example. Like there's all sorts of things that we'll have still not a beta, but we can still have the core of deploying a waypoint, sending traffic through it, applying policies as beta.
I'm a bit worried about having too many modes. I mean, if we are saying sandwich is good, we should stick with sandwich and not have too many.
I agree. Like I don't see much value in a future option of like, do you want sandwich or not? Like that should be kind of an internal detail. I don't think we have proven out enough that sandwich is universally better at solving all the use cases or close to being implemented. I mean, it's close, but it's not as close as what we already have, which exists.
That sounds reasonable.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we're on the same page that eventually we'll have sandwich. If sandwich is good, we'll have sandwich. If sandwich is bad, we'll not have sandwich, but we'll not have two options, basically. That's.
I mean, sandwich is, I think no matter what, it's useful for integrations with other waypoints, right? Whether it's useful enough to be the way that Istio does as well remains to be seen. Now, granted, if it's useful not to be used with other things, then it's probably productionized enough that it's also useful for Istio.
I mean, the reason, I mean, if we find any technical, I mean, it doesn't work, performance is bad or whatever, sandwich is bad, then obviously it's probably not good for others as well. I mean, if it's
right, yeah, that's what I was saying.
Implement Avon directly, but if we find that it is compatible in performance and whatever, then I don't think there is a good reason for us to port two modes. That's really my concern because you have nothing.
Yeah, so I think
especially
from a user standpoint, like when we ship the Istio product, there's no reason to offer modes. When we build infrastructure in Istio that is extensible to vendors and whatnot to plug different things in, then there is value in having different options because they may have different needs. Fewer is better, but like, for example, if you're at Google Cloud, maybe you don't want to use sandwich for various reasons. If you're at a different company, maybe you do. So like I don't think we should be prescriptive and say everyone must use sandwich, for example, but you know, the fewest ways to meet the most needs. But that's a like implementer facing decision, not a user facing decision.
Okay.
If we have sandwich in the docs, we've probably done a bad job.
Well, I think we might also find that there is an acceptable cost, but a cost to running sandwiched, and that a vendor may choose to do that to avoid the complexity of implementing Connect themselves, even though we never go there for like regular Istio waypoint.
Do we have any benchmarks? Stephen, did you do any kind of tests? I would expect the opposite, to sandwich to be faster.
The initial tests I think I did were like throughput tests. I'm not sure if that was the best thing to focus on at the time, but it was relatively close. Like within
close lower or close higher?
Close
lower or close higher?
But I was definitely, I was doing this on a laptop and plenty of room for noise.
Okay, let's keep testing.
How much slower are we talking? Like,
This was like iPerf, and it was a few hundred megabytes slower.
oh, that's not so bad.
Yeah, we should figure out why, because again, we are supposed to have far less processing on that part. Okay.
It's not terribly surprising to me that going through two different processes and TCP stacks is slower than one process in memory.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I could go either way. Like it's it's kind of the whole discussion of it is waypoint faster. Like it's 3 network hops instead of 2, but faster for other reasons, and which one matters more. So I heard Google just announced a bunch of new machines. Maybe we can just tell everyone to run on faster machines, and then we can worry less about performance. And yes, good point, Ben. If we have performance problems, Sandwich will help find them. Like it is true. Like Sandwich is exactly what every application is doing with cTunnel. So if it's bad, then we have a problem. Yeah. One thing we did have that's still pending an owner. I know Whitney said you could work on it, but we're kind of tight on time. So you said you could maybe work on it in the future. If someone wants to make some Envoy changes to the telemetry to match the telemetry stuff we said we would emit. And there's also some access logging stuff where we're logging like the internal listener details instead of the real things. That could use some hands, or there's some other tasks as well if anyone's looking for things to do this week.
John, on zTunnel telemetry, you're talking about zTunnel, no?
I was talking about Waypoint, actually. I think the zTunnel stuff
Waypoint.
is all good, but yeah, carry on with your question.
So on zTunnel, we are using the standard hotel SDK, and we are emitting the standard hotel traces and logs and metrics.
Yeah. So what we're doing today. So in Rust, there's a tracing library, and it's like slog kind of. So it has pluggable backends. We're only logging to standard out there. We don't plug in any tracing. But we're also not doing like tracing in the traditional sense. We're just using it as a logging library, essentially. I have a PR that's in draft that adds access logs that just kind of mirror how Envoy does it, that at the end of every connection, we log all the attributes of the logs. Today, we have just some kind of ad hoc, more, I would call it like operational things, which we could probably do. Now, on the metric side, we use a Prometheus client library. So we can only do Prometheus metrics from that. We have a very light abstraction over it, like very light, but we could swap it out for OTel, which could then do OTLP or Prometheus if we wanted to, or something else. But today, it's not like we're just one config setting away from doing OTLP. We're only using Prometheus client library.
Yeah. I'm not so interested about the protocol itself, because the libraries usually support multiple protocols, and especially in Rust. My concern is if you're using the stuff, because Rust hotel support has instrumentation. You can just inject it into for HTTP and for TCP, and it generates standard standard conventions basically with the names that are used by other instrumented things. So any chance we can switch to Hotel SDK and which has Prometheus? I mean, I'm not against exporting with Prometheus. I'm just saying that if we can use the standard libraries that and instrumentation that Rust provides.
Yeah, the reason why I initially used the Prometheus library, well, there's actually 2 different Prometheus ones. There was like this third-party one, and then Prometheus decided Rust was cool, and they built their own, which I think is actually way better, but it's way less used. So we use the official one that is less popular. At the time, there was no metric support at all in the OTel Rust libraries. And their library is, it's, very standardized. It's very committee. It's driven by committees, right? It's different than an opinionated Rust one. So at the time we went with Prometheus one. We could consider changing it. I don't think there's much value in changing. I have to look at what the metrics look like. I'm quite skeptical that they'll give us useful metrics out of the box and that we wouldn't have to just go report our own metrics anyways. But that might be wrong. I'm not sure. I haven't looked since.
Yes, I was just going to say I did pick up the task, but I wasn't aware that we need to get it in before the code freeze or for this new release. So since I'm new to Ambient and the telemetry component, I'm curious if there's anyone that has more experience and the capacity to either pair with me, point me in the right direction, or just like get this done together.
I will say it doesn't necessarily, I mean, it is a bug fix, so it doesn't necessarily have to be in before the code freeze. No, it would be quite nice to be in before we fully ship a beta because the telemetry is kind of an API. So changing it would be not preferred. But if there is someone that could help you as well, that would be good reasons aside from timeliness as well.
Yeah.
It's pretty
Is there anyone available?
hard code base to approach in my experience. So
okay, that's good news in terms of the timeline, but I'm curious if anyone is actually available.
This is the waypoint telemetry, I forget what the name, with the single proxy telemetry approach that was mentioned earlier.
Yes,
yeah,
and the goal is to trim the metrics.
It's actually not as big of a change as I had thought it would be. Like the metrics we emit are actually fairly close. There's just a few things that are wrong. Like we're missing a few labels for some reason. Some of the labels are wrong. But it's not like we're fundamentally totally doing completely bogus things and we need to totally rewrite from the ground up, right? I think it's more tweaks. I think we already have a special like waypoint code path in the Istio proxy telemetry, if I remember correctly. So it's just kind of tweaks to that potentially.
Oh, so this would be in the proxy code base, not in the pilot code base.
Yes, I would imagine so. I mean, maybe there's something we need to pipe down, but most of it should be in the proxy. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Sorry. Yeah, since we're talking waypoint telemetry to confirm, we are using the WDS instead of the metadata exchange, or we are still using metadata exchange? And second,
I believe it's using WDS. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And second, since the high cardinality and all the other stuff are problematic, do we support the telemetry API to turn off labels, and do we have any plan to support kind of a mode where users can have a simpler way to opt in to do not crash my envoy?
So is there a simpler way other than the telemetry API? No, we could potentially have one. Is the telemetry API supported? That's an interesting question. First, I was a bit confused by this, but I was distracted by other things to push too much on it. But in some recent call, I think it was the TOC, there was some discussion around should we support the telemetry API? And I feel like we accidentally stumbled on the conclusion that we should not support it. And I say accidentally because it felt like it was more like no one cared enough to go champion it. And so we then decided we should remove it. But I feel like what it should mean is that no one's championed it. It already works and is implemented. And so we can keep it as alpha or experimental and work to stabilize it to beta quality as needed. I don't think there's any need to go strip it out.
So it has target ref, and target ref is fully implemented. That's really the question, because workload select.
Target ref is implemented in terms of selecting a whole waypoint. We should for all the APIs, and I don't think we've done it for any of them. Also add like route level and like more fine grain.
Okay. Yeah, gateway for starters. That was good. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not very happy with the Terminate API, but again, we need something, because with waypoints in particular being shared, you'll have far more memory use with the high cardinality metrics that we generate.
Yep.
To Whitney's question, I'm looking at I'm assuming this is the right, if this just stats filter. If no one else has the time to help out, I should have more time to pair with Whitney and work on the telemetry in the next week or so. I've done a couple of small on-way PRs, so it's not completely foreign to me. But if anybody else happens to get some time, please let us know.
I have very little familiarity with it, but if you run into issues, feel free to ask me and I can see if I can help. No promises though.
Appreciate it.
All right. Anything else? If not, we can wrap this up early. All right. Thanks everyone, and we can follow up on the Ambient Dev channel if there's anything that comes up.